Welcome everyone to this third edition of the KIX Conversation. I am Ivana Zacarías, researcher of the KIX LAC project, and it's a pleasure to share this space with all of you to exchange experiences and discuss topics related to education in Latin America and the Caribbean. With these spaces, we want to contribute to the discussion on how to tackle educational challenges in the region, acknowledging strength and experiences. Before we start, we will share with you the KIX LAC institutional video.
Contribute to improving education in Latin America and the Caribbean, sharing experiences and successful educational innovations between countries, which is what the KIX LAC does, using evidence to generate a high impact on educational policies, which is what the KIX LAC does, facilitating the construction of networks between people and countries that work for a comprehensive quality of education, which is what the KIX LAC does. KIX LAC is the knowledge and innovation exchange hub for education in Latin America and the Caribbean, a space to learn, think, and improve the quality of education in our countries. There are different KICs in the world. In Latin America and the Caribbean, the KICs brings together Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, Haiti, Honduras, Nicaragua, St Lucia, and St Vincent and the Grenadines, but they all work for the same goal: share, systemize, and promote educational improvements. The challenge of an inclusive education calls us all, students, teachers, experts, schools, and countries. We must improve education, and that is what KIX LAC does. An initiative led by SUMA, Laboratory of Research and Innovation in Education for Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, and promoted by GPE and IDRC.
We thank all the people that are joining us today on Facebook Live and YouTube. As the video mentioned, KIX is the Knowledge, Innovation and Exchange Initiative promoted by the Global Partnership for Education and the International Development Research Center, bringing together a wide range of actors in the field of education. Its objective is to contribute to the strengthening of education systems in partnered countries. To achieve its objective, KIX relies on regional hubs worldwide, where educational leaders share information, knowledge, innovation, and experiences. Among these hubs, SUMA, together with the Organization for Eastern Caribbean States, leads the Latin America and Caribbean Hub. The hub comprises 8 countries: Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, Haiti, Honduras, Nicaragua, St Lucia, and St Vincent and the Grenadines. We remind you that this event is streamed on Facebook and YouTube, and that you are invited to post your questions and comments here. On this occasion, it is a pleasure to introduce Dr. Neva Pemberton, Technical Specialist in the Education Development Management Unit of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Commission, and brings her expertise to the Oecs Accelerated Fund for Education Response and Recovery Grant from the Global Partnership for Education. Dr. Pemberton is a psychologist from George Washington University and holds a master's and a PhD in international and comparative education from the University of California in international education. From the University of California, and postgraduate degree in advanced education sector planning from UNESCO. It is also a pleasure to introduce Dr. Claudia Louis. Claudia is the head of planning for the Department of Education, Innovation, and Gender Relations in St Lucia. She has worked in the field of ICT in education and has also been a secondary school teacher. She also serves on the board of trustees and of Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. Dr. Louis holds a PhD in Information Science and Technology from Syracuse University, where she conducted research on technology-based innovations in public agencies. She holds an MBA from Carleton University in Canada and a Bachelor in Science in Computer Science and Management from Kingston University of Technology, and she is recipient of the Fulbright International Science and Technology Award. Welcome, Neva and Claudia. Thank you for accepting our invitation and sharing your experience with the community that joined us today through our Facebook and YouTube channels. Neva and Claudia are going to talk with us about their experience with the impact of COVID in education during this month. So please, Neva, Claudia, now it's your turn.
Good morning and good afternoon to all that are on the call with us today. On behalf of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Education Development Management Unit, I would like to thank our SUMA colleagues for the invitation to be a part of this KIX conversation. The conversation series is a wonderful and much needed platform for engaging on education realities and innovations in the Global South. And it's an honor to have the opportunity to engage in critical dialogue with those tuned in today on the challenges, response strategies, and opportunities with respect to equity in education in light of COVID-19. While my colleague, Dr. Louis, and I recognize that the main intention of this series is to engage in an open conversation on the topic, we thought it'd be useful to first do a presentation to provide some context within which the conversation can be framed. Oops, excuse me, I'm moving a little too fast. So, over the next 15 minutes or so, we will first provide a snapshot of the COVID-19 situation on the Oecs and its impact on educational institutions. We'll then discuss some equity considerations across policy domains. And by and large, we're going to highlight that on the one hand, the pandemic has exacerbated existing equity issues and also created some new ones. But on the other, it has simultaneously provided the opportunity for the region's education systems to build back more equitably. Admittedly, these issues to be discussed are really not unique to the Oecs, but nonetheless, by sharing our experiences and strategic responses as a region, we're going to be able to contribute to this global discourse on striving for equity in education provision in light of COVID-19. So first, to provide a bit of a snapshot on COVID-19 and education in the Oecs. Since the virus was declared a global pandemic in March, cumulative cases range from about 18 in our British overseas territories to over 9,000 in the associated member state of Guadeloupe. In terms of the impact on education institutions, all schools closed in March, affecting approximately 152,000 students and 11,000 teachers in the English-speaking Oecs territories. Across the region, there were partial school openings in April to June of 2020, and students really returned en masse in September of 2020 with a mix of face-to-face and virtual learning. I'll now turn it over to my colleague Claudia to share a bit about what's happened in St. Lucia.
Thank you, Neva. We would look at this snapshot, which shows the interruption in traditional face-to-face instruction and the abrupt increase in the number of days of online instruction. And this sudden and drastic change meant that there was little time for preparation. So Neva would give a little more about equity and access pre-pandemic.
Thanks so much, Claudia. You know, equity has really been a key transversal policy issue long before COVID-19. Sustainable Development Goal 4's targeted focus on equity and inclusion, I think, makes this clear. And also our regional strategies, both the Oecs education sector strategy from 2012 to 2026, and our CARICOM's human resource development strategy from 2018 to 2030, both center improving equity as key to achieving the success of all learners. Regarding access and participation before the pandemic, there was really wide variation across our region, especially at the early childhood level, which is non-compulsory in many of our territories. But as you can see, with only 69% of 3 to 4-year-olds enrolled at this level, and an indication that more girls are being reached than boys, there are clearly access and equity issues to be addressed in the sector. And I think critically around the world, we recognize that strengthening access in early childhood education is always a priority, given the evidence that shows the importance of high quality learning at this level to student outcomes later in life. I think we have to really mention that commendably, the region had achieved universal primary education with a 97% net enrollment rate and gender parity in participation. However, when we look at the secondary level, we see some latent equity issues, with only 85% of secondary aged children enrolled at this level, and only about 78% of a cohort completing the cycle. The data that we have on gender parity, internal efficiencies, and also from a 2016 UNICEF study on out-of-school children in the region highlight that boys are disproportionately not enrolled at this level, which is a major equity issue that has been flagged for intervention. If we think about equity in learning outcomes, when we look at the percentage of our students that attain the current benchmark of success at this level, the data is concerning across the region for both males and females. Although, as we can see, fewer males are really attaining this level of achievement. Also, I think it's important to highlight that this data represents the pass rate for students that are actually writing the exams. While we don't have regional data on the percentage of students that are excluded each year from sitting these exams, an education sector analysis in St. Kitts and Nevis highlighted that approximately only 70% of a cohort are provided the opportunity to sit these exams, which means that 30% of our learners are denied access to this standard benchmark of achievement. This in and of itself is a serious equity issue in terms of access to quality learning outcomes, which certainly predates COVID-19 and requires further research and intervention. Claudia is now going to speak to us a little bit about governance and equity pre-pandemic.
From the governance perspective, the islands of the Oecs, there is a relatively enabling legislative environment that allows us to pursue equity, though fewer countries have taken the necessary regulatory steps to ensure that learners with disabilities and special needs are not discriminated against in the provision of education. However, as a sub-region, we have been unable so far to effectively plan for equity inclusion, as education management information systems do not provide the evidence base needed to truly make targeted interventions using an equity lens. While there are plans afoot to close this gap, the sub-region, as it stands, does not collect data on students' socioeconomic status and geographic location, and there is insufficient data on students' special education needs, ethnicities, and home languages, thus presenting some challenges. We would continue the discussion. I hand over to Neva.
Thanks so much, Claudia. I mean, I think that really paints the picture of where we are in terms of equity across policy domains before the pandemic. And I think as highlighted in the GEM report, COVID-19 has heightened our existing equity concerns and has created some new ones. Access to education, enabling social safety nets, and the quality of teaching and learning is really disproportionately constrained for our most vulnerable. With the necessary thrust to engage technologies to support the continuity of learning, the digital divide runs the risk of undermining gains that have been made already with access and participation at all levels, and significantly impacts the quality of education, as our teachers and students really have differential competencies in using technology for teaching and learning. Our students from homes with low socioeconomic status and those living in geographic areas with limited infrastructure for connectivity are particularly constrained in this respect. And I think beyond the digital divide, our early learners, struggling students, and those with special education needs are also at increased risk for further exclusion and learning loss due to school closures. I think it's really important to flag that unlike many places in the world, our education systems, as far as possible, have welcomed students back for face-to-face instruction. And we really often prioritize the vulnerable groups mentioned, highlighting the region's commitment to pursuing equity in our COVID-19 response. Due to some of our physical space limitations and our required COVID-19 protocols, our densely populated schools, however, have been operating on a shift system, some splitting the day between students and others really using every other day or multiple day rotations. I think it's interesting because there really has yet to be data collected on how the type of shift system may impact both participation and the quality of teaching and learning. I think it's plausible that such research would reveal disparities in access and student learning, depending on the approach, and thus is really worthy of further investigation. And I think lastly, as Claudia had highlighted, data on equity was difficult before COVID-19 and has really been exacerbated by the need to collect information and monitor and evaluate in a distributed teaching and learning environment. So now Claudia will share a little bit with you about equity in St. Lucia since COVID-19.
Yes. Well, like many other developing nations, St. Lucia we faced our own set of challenges. We had, say, for example, the situation with the pandemic was constantly evolving and data collection was not able to keep pace. We have, so for example, the socioeconomic status of a child may change overnight if one or both parents suddenly loses their job. How often would we have to collect data in a situation like that to remain relevant? With the online schooling, we also had questions, how do we record and interpret attendance? For example, does a child being absent mean that there's lack of access to the technology, or is it caused by some other reason? We had reports that students may log in and disappear. So how do we interpret that as opposed to collecting attendance data? The absence of a strict zoning policy means that sometimes we had students traveling longer distances to their school of choice at the secondary level. And this increased the demands on the transportation subsidy program because students were suddenly left without their regular transportation. We have the closure of the early childhood sector presenting a significant challenge. The sector was closed for an extended period, and this exacerbates the access and participation issues pre-COVID. We also have the quality or attendance for older siblings who were left with the childcare responsibilities for their younger siblings. As Neva mentioned earlier, we have the large schools operating on shift systems while the smaller schools were welcoming students full-time. In this situation, it created an advantage for students in the smaller schools as they potentially had more face-to-face time than the students in the larger schools. So just a snapshot. Of course, there are many other challenges, but so I would now turn over to Neva to look at the OECS response.
Thanks so much, Claudia. So the Commission has recognized that COVID-19 obviously presents a threat to equity in education, and as a result, we have developed and are implementing the COVID-19 Education Response and Recovery Strategy with significant financial support from the Global Partnership for Education, among other supporters and partners. The strategy is really anchored by our broader regional strategy and intends to both reduce inequities and access to quality teaching and learning, and also build resilience in our education sectors in responding to crises and disasters. The strategy is guided by 4 pillars, and largely the interventions are catered at vulnerable students and teachers. So in terms of harmonizing our policy responses, our benefiting countries are in the process of developing targeted academic recovery programs for vulnerable students to really mitigate against the learning loss that has been experienced. Additionally, we're working on a data governance framework, which will ensure that there are clear pathways to improving data quality, including the disaggregation of data by individual characteristics across the region. This work predated the COVID-19 pandemic and will continue over the next few years. And I think in terms of our transition to distributed learning, major steps have really been taken to bridge the digital divide. We have purchased and are deploying 11,000 devices for under-resourced teachers and students. And we're also participating in Project Giga, which among other things seeks to ensure that all learners have the connectivity that's needed for teaching and learning. Significantly, we're also providing certification training in effective pedagogy for distributed teaching and learning, so that way we can ensure that our teachers and students can meaningfully engage in the virtual space when it's necessary. And I think to support student well-being, it's important to highlight that our vulnerable students have been provided with personal hygiene kits, or in the process of are being provided with personal hygiene kits, and also have received psychosocial support in schools as well as virtually. Claudia, would you like to share a little bit about the responses in St. Lucia?
Yes. And at the national level, we are very grateful to the OECS for the support that we received through the Global Partnership for Education. And we also had some local responses. For example, there was an income support program which provided monthly stipends to help cushion the effect of job losses. That was at a national level, but of course, this helped sustain parents so that students could continue schooling. We had the school welfare programs, such as the school feeding, the book bursary, and transportation subsidy program were expanded to include more at-risk students, and these numbers definitely increased. We had psychosocial support provided virtually by counselors. You had students preparing for examinations at the grade 6 and Form 5 level were allowed to come in for face-to-face instruction, and that helped narrow the learning gap. There was, of course, like many other countries, we had distribution of tablets, laptops, MiFi devices for internet access for teachers and vulnerable students. We had the distribution of over 7,000 ebooks over a period of time to help bridge the digital divide. And we also had the Human Capital Resilience Project, which is funded by the World Bank to the tune of 20 million project. What is interesting about this project is the conceptualization and planning began way before the pandemic, but it turned out to be the ideal timing as the response was able to capture the negative impact. One component of this project focused on technical, vocational education and training in skill areas to retool persons who have lost gainful employment in the emerging job market.
Thanks so much, Claudia, for sharing some of the response strategies in St. Lucia. And I think it's just important for us to look a little bit at the opportunities that COVID-19 has created. It certainly has allowed us to reimagine education, to bounce back better, or to quote the GEM report, to ensure that really all means all. I think the investments that are being made in our region and across the world in ICTs and education, and those that we're doing to ensure that we address learning loss, can be sustained to ensure that vulnerable populations benefit over the long term. For example, the innovations that are happening with respect to remote teaching and learning can potentially facilitate diverse second chance options for the out-of-school populations that were referred to earlier in the presentation. And they also provide a mechanism for us to bring our best teachers, our best learning support personnel and guidance counselors to the students and learners that need their services the most, both within countries and across the OECS. Additionally, I think programs to address learning loss can be sustained to really help achieve closing equity gaps and achievement gaps. The pandemic has forced us to reflect on the evidence that we have and the structures that we have to monitor and evaluate disparities in education, and further have allowed us to reflect on how we can better or best use our human and material resources to reduce identified equity gaps. Arguably, this should have been in focus prior to COVID-19 or irrespective of COVID-19, but we really need to sustain this focus on equity. If we maintain an equity lens in the pursuit of our policies, the pursuit of our practices, and our financing models to ensure that we're bringing the margins to the center, I think really we'll be well positioned as a region to ensure, as the vision of our sector strategy says, that every learner succeeds. So with that, I want to thank Suma and KIX for the opportunity to present briefly on the situation in the OECS and in St. Lucia, and we are welcome to open the floor to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neva. Thank you, Claudia, for this very enlightening and informative presentation about what the OECS has done in this pandemic, and specifically what the government of St. Lucia has done. I want to summarize some of the main points that you've made before we start the more relaxed and friendly conversation about what you have talked about. I think that one important point that you've mentioned is the challenges in collecting data, and specifically in this context. So we have to be aware of this problem for the future, because we know that this is just the beginning, and we are going to face similar situations, not very, probably in the near future. The other point that you've made, that you've done, is that, of course, the critical role that the OECS plays for supporting the governments. We know that the OECS plays an important role in the region, but the examples you've shared, for example, with the collection of information or distribution of material or infrastructure, I think it's something to highlight. And finally, and this is something I think is very important, you started mentioning the pre-existing inequalities in the region, in gender inequalities, SES inequalities, and I think it was very important what you mentioned at the end regarding the importance of focusing our lens on the learners who are at risk of exclusion. And this is important, and you mentioned you mentioned the GEM report and the slogan, all means all, and yes, I think that we have to give real meaning to that slogan. It's not just a slogan, it should have content, it have to be operationalized, and it's a responsibility for us, for the organization, for the civil society, and the governments as well. Suma led the writing of the report in the last year for Latin America and the Caribbean, and it was very challenging. Many of the points that you mentioned, collecting data and finding so many vulnerabilities and highlighting and giving light to a lot of vulnerabilities that are still part of our region. So we want to share some questions, as I said before. I have a first question for Neva, but maybe any of you want to answer. You mentioned that the situation of students with disabilities is one that is something that we have to be aware. So what examples can you give us of interventions that sought to address their needs during the lockdown? It's a group that not all governments have focused on, and it's important to track what have been their performance during the lockdown. So if you have any example, would be great.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I'll take an initial stab, but I think Claudia also has a little bit to offer on the topic.
Okay.
You know, for the most part, the period of lockdown in many of the member states was not as long as it's been in other places around the world. And so I think in the initial lockdown phase, many member states focused on trying to ensure that there were, you know, packets that could go to students with special education needs that could really help them. We also, in some countries, there were devices that were purchased with special technologies put on them to enable the kinds of support they needed. And I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, what came out of a lot of our discussions with member states is when it was time to open, and you would recognize there's lots that goes into the considerations about who comes back first and how we phase reopening. Many of our member states really did focus on bringing the most vulnerable back first. So there was a strict focus on ensuring that those with special education needs would be the first back to face-to-face instruction, because we recognize that it's that difficult to provide the kind of quality support that they need in a virtual environment. So I think that those are the things that we've done as a region. If I'm honest, and I think my colleagues at the Commission would agree, it has been a struggle for all of us in the region to adequately support those with special education needs. It's something that in our upcoming strategy, our upcoming education plan and program to support that plan, we're really going to be taking a much better shot at identifying who are our special needs populations in mass, because again, because of our limited data, we don't have that information at the tips of our fingertips and the kinds of services that they need. So I think as a region, we did our best to provide them with, you know, things that they can hold in their hands and support that they can reach. A lot of our teachers used WhatsApp and various functionalities like that in the very beginning. And then we really focused on bringing them back as soon as possible for those countries that were able to do so. Claudia, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to that.
Well, yes, like similar to other islands, we provided devices to the students with special needs. And this is one group of students that has been forgotten in many cases, but in the case of St. Lucia's education sector, they have been receiving over the past 3 or 4 years, they have been a priority of the Ministry of Education. On the particular project, the KIX project, we have provided training and devices and even we are building 2 new institutions for students with special needs. So we have recognized that the importance, and we have recognized the times that they were probably left behind, and an effort is definitely being made to address that.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a very passionate topic. Of course, we had to do a lot of things still. I have another question about the crisis, and you mentioned that the crisis had created some opportunities, but can we say that we can take lessons about the crisis? Are there things that we have done that we shouldn't repeat, for example, in a future crisis? I feel like I'm monothematic with this thing of a future crisis, but we should be careful, I guess.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
Claudia, maybe you want to take this one first, and then I'll follow up?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so with every situation, we always have to look back and reflect and see what could have been done differently. In this situation, I think our reactions were, we had some emergency response and we had to act. So at the time, we were planning for a short-term situation. We were not planning for a longer-term situation. So the abrupt school closures and the online schooling, we were planning for just a couple of months. We did not anticipate at the time that we would be here 1 year later. So maybe the short-term aspect of our planning, but well, nobody else really could predict. Also, we were looking to as developing countries, we were looking to the developed countries for direction to see where they were going. And in that situation, we realized that they also were struggling and they were grappling. They didn't have the answers either. So we possibly have to recognize that the answers exist within and among our own people, and we should look there more often for the answers. And also, when you talk about resilience planning, we typically plan for natural disasters. We plan for hurricanes, we plan for earthquakes. What do we do in this situation? We had never really planned for a pandemic before. Well, none of us had seen a pandemic in our lifetime. So now that we have recognized this is one possibility, all of these have to be incorporated into our future planning.
Great, great answers. Thank you very much to both of you. And now we have here are some questions from the audience. What are the plans for recovering the learning loss in terms of, I don't know, investment or, for example, implementation of innovative pedagogies? What are there any plans? I guess that it may vary among countries, but
yeah, I think one of the major focuses for us across the region is really ensuring that teachers are adequately prepared to function in a distributed environment from now until forever. And again, this was something that we've talked about for a long time, the investment in ICTs. How can it be a value added to teaching and learning? And we really had a slow start, but COVID-19 has kind of thrust us into this. And again, this is one of the opportunities I think we have, is to kind of keep the momentum. So I mentioned that as a region, we are providing certification training for teachers across the OECS in effective pedagogy for a distributed environment, particularly because we realize there's going to be periods where there's total shutdown and it has to be virtual. There's going to be periods where we're learning in school and at home on shift systems. And so really ensuring that teachers are ready to be a part of what is the new normal and will remain the new normal, I think is at the center. So we've had a lot of discussions also about looking at teacher education programs to really ensure the kinds of pedagogies that are necessary moving forward are a part of regular practice. You know, I think we've had an urgent response, so we're all trying to respond. And outside of the OECS, there's been a lot done by UNESCO and Blackboard. There's been a significant investment in trying to build competencies, but this has to become a part of regular practice. And so I think that that's been one of the things that we've really kind of been trying to focus on. And then also, of course, with the use of technologies, how can those be sustained, and where do those make best sense? You know, technology, not everything needs to be high tech. And in fact, I think some of our youngest learners do better in sort of face-to-face interactions. But where we are leveraging the technologies, how can they become a part of regular practice? And how can we use them, as I had mentioned earlier, to have innovative practices? The out-of-school populations, it might be a very innovative way to bring them back if they can attend 1 or 2 classes on a mobile phone. How can we try to leverage these sorts of things to close the gaps that were there before COVID? But now we have some interesting tools at our disposal to try out and sustain. So I think that that's one of the responses and lessons that we've learned and we'll try to apply moving forward. Claudia, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yes, as again, I would like to say we did get support from the Oecs at the regional level, and the academic recovery program is one of the major vehicles we are looking for to address learning loss. We have already started the discussions, and the first step in this program, of course, will be a diagnostic assessment, where we will be able to administer this tool to students so we can get a proper sense of where the learning gaps are. And from the results of this diagnostic assessment, then we can plan properly to see where the interventions will be best needed. We have, at the district level, we have instructional plans are being prepared, and that would tailor. So we realize that it is not one size fits all, although we are a small island, but it is still not one size fits all because there's such diversity among our schools, among our learners, among the needs of our teachers. We also have made adjustments, say for last year, we made adjustments to the grade 6 examinations, and that the decision of what exactly would be covered in this assessment. And this year, again, the various departments, teachers are meeting again to see how our local examinations can be adjusted to reflect the time that has lost, the time that we have lost. So it is an ongoing process. Again, we recognize that it is not a one-shot answer, but it is planning and it involves multiple stakeholders.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Neva, for your answers. We have a question from Charmaine, who is one of our representatives from Guyana. She's asking that it resonated to her the issue of attendance and how we can judge it. Her question is, what are the underpinnings of students' lack of attendance? Can you answer some of that?
The underpinnings of student lack of attendance?
Yes.
Yes, it could be a multiplicity of answers. Hence the reason we were saying that we have to revise our data collection methods to suit what the changes that COVID has brought about. In the beginning, you would have attendance would be whether a child shows up physically in front of a teacher. And that would be an indicator of many other things. The teacher could physically look at the child and see whether or not there are problems at home. Now, in the different environment, a child may show up in the online environment. We're not sure what happens. One thing that has happened recently, we have live classes, especially in our primary school levels. In the early days of the pandemic, the teachers had not been trained, but since then we have trained over 1,000 teachers have been trained in Google Classrooms. And now we actually have live classes going on. So the teacher can get a sense of who is physically present. So that would give a bit of a semblance. The earlier days, it was very challenging because if a child was absent, we did not know whether it was because of lack of device. But as time goes on, we are learning more lessons and we are making adjustments as we go along.
Great.
Yeah, and Yeah,
Yes,
but it's just a related point. It's not necessarily so much about attendance, but it's just about supporting teaching and learning in the distributed environment. You know, we talk a lot about what we need to do to support teachers so they can meaningfully engage students and provide the right kinds of classroom management. But the kind of support and accountability to ensure teachers are doing what's asked of them, I think, is a challenge as well. You know, we have a system of education supervision, which enables officers to provide support to teachers and principals, and also to ensure that they're following the rules and policies and procedures of ministries. And I think, again, in this distributed environment, it's difficult to provide that level of support and that level of accountability. So I think as a region, we're also contemplating, well, what are the kinds of platforms, what are the kinds of mechanisms, what are the new ways of operating to kind of mimic what happens in a school compound, but in a virtual space. So I think all of those things come together. How does a school attendance officer, for instance, function in a virtual space? And what does that mean? So there are all kinds of questions that I think we're learning through. I will say one of the biggest values at the OECS level is we've done I think a very good job of bringing countries together to kind of share what the challenges are, what the response strategies have been, and to learn from each other. And just as Claudia is saying, each country has its unique particularities. So do all the various countries, but there are some really great practices. So I think it's been really useful to learn what's happening in St. Lucia, and for St. Lucia to hear what's happening in Montserrat and St. Kitts and Nevis and Grenada, to see how where there are particular challenges in one place, they can learn from what's working in others as well.
Well, great. Unfortunately, we are 1 minute late, so we have to finish our presentation. It was very wonderful to listen to your opinions and your experiences about what has been affecting the OECS countries. Undoubtedly, we have a lot of challenges ahead. And thank you to both. We also thank the organization that support us, GPE, IDRC, of course, the rest of the team of OECS and the teams of SUMA that are involved in this initiative. And we, of course, invite you all to continue thinking and discussing the educational challenges in the region. And we invite you to follow us on our social networks, KIX LAC, to be informed of upcoming events, news, and activities that we will carry out during this year. Thanks again to all of you, and see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, Ivana. It's been a pleasure. We really appreciate it. Look forward to the next conversation. Thanks.
Thank you.
Forward as well.